College basketball's most important competitions, the NCAA tournaments, are in full swing. But an athlete's viral tweet is shining light on the inequalities between weight room facilities for the men's teams competing in Indianapolis and the women's teams competing in San Antonio. Oregon player Sedona Price sent this tweet out last week.
I got something to show y'all. So for the NCAA March Madness, the biggest tournament in college basketball for women, this is our weight room. Let me show y'all the men's weight room.
Now, after Prince's tweet, I said Price earlier, after Prince's tweet garnered media attention, the NCAA apologized and upgraded the women's facilities. But others have also claimed inequities in food, gift bags, and even COVID testing between the men's and women's tournaments. Joining us to delve deeper into the gender gap in sports is Julie DeCaro, senior writer and editor for Deadspin and author of the new book, Sidelined: Sports, Culture, and Being a Woman in America. Julie, good to see you again. We're going to get to that book in a bit as well. But I wanted to know, what is your reaction to this athlete's viral tweet?
Well, I think, Brandis, it's, all part of the same thing. Women, whether it's in the broadcast side, whether it's in beat reporting, whether it's women athletes, are just sort of habitually treated like we don't belong in this space. We're not welcome in this space. And, it's kind of amazing after what happened with the Wubble, with the WNBA. Women were staying in hotels with similarly bad conditions, with terrible food. They had bed bug traps under their mattresses. And you would think that after something like that happens, the NCAA would say, okay, let's make sure this doesn't happen this time. But there's, they never cease to amaze me with how tone deaf and how inconsiderate they can be of women athletes.
Now, the NCAA, they did react quickly. They apologized and upgraded the weight room. But was that enough?
I mean, it's not enough because that's not the only problem, right? I mean, first of all, the women are playing in Texas where there's not a mask mandate. So there's been a lot of questions about how safe these women actually are. They're getting reportedly inferior COVID tests than the men are getting. There are no photographers or not enough photographers covering the women's games. So if you go to a photo service and try to get pictures of the women's games, there are far fewer than there are for the men. There's the food issue. There's the equality of the weight room issue. I mean, it's just sort of things across the board. And it's great that they fixed the weight room issue, which I think, by the way, they did because a couple of retailers stepped up, like Dick's, to support and to send equipment to the women. But this kind of thing shouldn't be happening when the NCAA is involved in 2021.
So you mentioned these other discrepancies, of course. There's been a post that showed the lackluster women's meal compared to these full buffets for the men. Discrepancies between the COVID testing, the men and women are getting different tests, and the tournament has chalked that up to, taking advice from different health officials. Should these discrepancies be happening in the first place? What does all this say to you?
No, of course they shouldn't be happening. I mean, they moved the men's entire tournament to Indianapolis and to towns within 2 hours of either side of Indianapolis because they said they wanted the men to be safe. But, like I said, the women are sent to Texas where there's no mask mandate and which has all along through the COVID pandemic been one of the worst states in terms of positivity rate. We are, I don't know at this point, almost 50 years after the advent of Title IX. No, I mean, this stuff should not be happening. And it's amazing to me that someone didn't sit down with whoever was in charge of the men's tournament and say, okay, what are we doing? Let's make sure that there's equality across the board here. These are, Class A athletes in every sense of the word. And, it's just amazing, again, that in, this day and age that we're still seeing this kind of stuff when it comes to women's sports.
And initially, the NCAA argued, there has been the argument that the men's tournament makes so much more revenue than the women's tournament. And that is the reason for the difference in amenities, right down to, the towels and the gift bags. What's your reaction to that argument?
Well, first of all, I mean, all right, so if we want to talk about the men's game bringing in more money, let's spend the next 25 to 30 years dumping as much marketing and resources and money into the women's game, and then we'll check back and we'll see which game brings in more money. And, it's all part of a bigger picture, Brandis. If you don't market the game, if you don't tell the women's stories, if people don't know, because nothing is covered, what the beef is between this team and that team, or what's going on with this player and she's recovered from a severe injury, or this is her final, she's a senior and this is her last chance to win. if you don't tell those stories that we all know about the players in the men's game, then people aren't interested. And so it's all part of the bigger picture of outlets not wanting to cover women's sports because they perceive there being no audience, and there being no audience because the women are never covered. And by the way, there is a growing audience for women's sports, but they're not being an audience because people feel like they don't know anything about the people who are watching on the court. Watching anything when you don't know the stories of the players isn't all that much fun. It's basically just X's and O's. It's really those stories of people that make sports interesting for most of us.
And as you were speaking, Julie, we were looking at video of the women playing. And there's also been a lot of talk about even the March Madness term being emblazoned on the court for the men, but it is not. And we could see it in that video. It is not on the court for the women. But before we get out of here, we still have a little bit of time. Your new book just out this month, Sidelined: Sports Culture and Being a Woman in America. Why did you want to write this book, and what do you want people to take away from it?
There's a lot of things that women who are working in sports media feel they can't say. Because you get labeled as being difficult, because it affects your employer, it affects your relationships with your colleagues, it affects things across the board. And you get a lot of blowback and a lot of harassment for it. There's things that I feel like I can't say on Twitter, I can't say in social media, because I just don't have the bandwidth to deal with the response that I'm going to get. But putting it into a book felt more substantial than screaming into the void on social media, which is what I feel like I do most of the time. And what I'd like people to take away from it is that, it's not a sports book. It's a book that uses sports as an entree into the way that women are being treated across America, whether it's equal pay rights or whether it's violence against women or women hitting a glass ceiling in their jobs or things like crying at work. These are things that affect women not only nationally, but internationally. And sports is just sort of the entree that I use to talk about the topics.
Okay. Good to have you on the show. Again, the name of the book is Julie DeCaro's new book, Sidelined: Sports Culture and Being a Woman in America. My thanks to Julie DeCaro for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.